Shalom, everybody. Rabbi Edelstein here with another installment of Rabbi E in 3, brought to you by MEOR DC. Find us on Facebook or MEORDC.com and learn about our programs. Now, I want to wish you at the outset a great Shabbos, because you know what? It's going to be a great Shabbos. This Shabbos is called Shabbos HaGadol, the Great Shabbos. It's a very holy and sanctified Shabbos. Every Shabbos is holy, but this is a very special Shabbos because it directly precedes the festival of Pesach, when we became a nation, when God took us out of Egypt from slavery to freedom. This is called Shabbos HaGadol, the Great Shabbos. And there are many reasons specifically why it's called the Great Shabbos. Back then, before we left Egypt, it was on a Shabbos that the final stage of the preparations before the Exodus were beginning to take place. It was on that day, long, long ago, that we began to prepare the lamb, or each family a lamb, which we would sacrifice 4 days later, right before we left Egypt, as the Pesach offering, the Passover lamb offering. And it was remarkable and miraculous because the lamb was a deity of the Egyptians. And they were furious when they saw the Jewish people taking lambs, and they asked the Jewish people, what are you doing with those? Oh, we're going to slaughter them to our God, the one and only God, in a few days. And they were horrified at that we were going to do that, and they were powerless to stop us. So our rabbis say that's one of the reasons it's called the Great Shabbos. It was a great miracle even then, before we left Egypt, that we took their deity, prepared their deity for roasting, and they were powerless to stop us. It's called the Great Shabbos. Now, we actually read a Torah portion this week that talks about Egypt. It always falls out around this time in the calendar, but this year it's right before Pesach. And you know what it says? And this is why my Rabbi Ian 3 has such a harsh title, but let me read to you. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. Don't perform the practices of the land of Egypt in which you dwelled. And then God goes on to list, the Torah goes on to list, laws of sexuality, laws that command the Jewish people to sanctify our sexuality and don't follow the practices of Egypt. Because what was so bad about Egypt? You know, we think of, maybe charming pyramids, maybe not charming, but grand pyramids. Certainly they were that. But we might think of a cartoon character version of Egypt. Egypt was a horrible place. It was a land of Sleaze and Mummies and much, much else. What was so bad about Egypt? Certainly it was a great civilization. Of course we know that. But in terms of morality, or rather immorality and idolatry, those were the main categories of transgressions that our Torah tells us Egypt was immersed in, swamped in, or wallowing in. Immorality, idolatry. When God took us out of Egypt, he didn't just free us from a bitter physical slavery. We know it was bitter. And we'll talk about that, God willing, in a few nights at the beautiful Seder, when we talk about the physical bondage. But along with the physical bondage, if you look in the Haggadah, it makes reference to our spiritual bondage. We were affected by the idolatry of Egypt. We weren't affected by the immorality, at least in action. The rabbis say we kept our family units together and husbands and wives together, but the atmosphere of decadence and corruption of Egypt affected us. And that's spiritual death to the Jewish person. And therefore God, when he took us out of Egypt, he took us from physical slavery to freedom, to cherus, and also from spiritual slavery of idolatry and immorality, that atmosphere, to come to him, to become his people, a people aspiring for holiness. Have a great Shabbos. We're leaving the land of Sleaze and Mummies. We'll talk more. Have a great, great Shabbos.